Star blessings, beloveds. I'd like to talk to you about Mercury retrograde. There's a few things that we can consider from the point of view of Mercury this year going retrograde in the Earth Triad, so the Earth signs. Where I'd like to begin actually is I want to just give some considerations for the element of Earth. And so what I'm actually going to read a couple of pages actually, so I'd ask you to be patient and just consider these statements from the point of view of the Earth element itself. So these descriptions can be applied really to any planet in an Earth sign. However, we are going to consider it from the point of view of Mercury going retrograde this year 3 times in the Earth signs. So it starts off with its retrograde journey in Taurus, which happens just after this solar eclipse. Solar eclipse is on the 20th of April, the Aries solar eclipse, and then a day later, Mercury stations retrograde. So the first thing is, before I start reading, where is Mercury transiting in your birth chart? It will retrograde on the 15th degree of Taurus. So that degree is going to be important. What houses does Mercury rule in your birth chart? It's always worth paying attention to those houses as well. And certainly where the transit of Mercury and its retrograde cycle will be relative to your birth chart, right? So those are the basic kind of things to start with. You may be having a Mercury return. You may have Mercury in Aries, and you may have a house that contains both Aries and Taurus, so Mercury is going to cover that territory. These are all things to consider. So Mercury entered Taurus early April. I think it was the 4th of April. And when it entered Taurus, it immediately formed a square to Pluto. Now that's going to be important relative to Mercury's retrograde cycle, because even though it goes retrograde later in the month at the 15th degree, it goes all the way back to, I think, about 5 degrees. 5 degrees when it stations direct. So it comes back to this degree here that we are seeing on the screen at the moment. And it goes direct on this degree. And that's actually on the 14th of May. And so from the 21st of April to the 14th of May is the period of Mercury's retrograde journey. And the 2 main aspects that I'm really going to be considering today, well, there's 3 actually, I think, perhaps 4, but 2 main ones that I'm considering is certainly the square to Pluto. It is also forming a sextile to Mars, and it is also forming a sextile to Saturn, and it is also forming a conjunction to the North Node. So they're the main sort of aspects Mercury has as of today, actually, but as it proceeds forward and goes retrograde on the 15th degree, Mars would have moved on quite significantly. So that sextile won't return. This sextile is only present today, which is the 7th of April, for instance. However, the sextile to Saturn and the square to Pluto will really be the energies carried through its retrograde cycle, because when it stations direct, it's again going to be exactly sextile Saturn. So that tells me that sextile is quite important. And even though it won't be exactly square Pluto, it's still going to be only 4 degrees or, about 4 degrees or so away from the square to Pluto. So that says to me that the square to Pluto and the sextile to Saturn are really important components of this Mercury retrograde relative to aspects. And certainly the first thing to consider is the fact that it's in Taurus, and that's where it goes retrograde. And as I said, the other two Mercury retrograde periods this year, one's in August, one's in December, are going to be in the earth signs as well. So the next one's going to be in Virgo, and then the last one towards the end of the year is going to be in Capricorn. And I'm bringing this up now because when you think about Mercury retrograde in Taurus and then subsequently having another two retrograde cycles in the other two earth signs, then we're seeing a story building up through the earth triad, right? Relative to the planet Mercury. Now, Mercury, of course, has to do with a lot of different matters, but some of the most, common themes and signatures of Mercury, of course, is the written and spoken word, all forms of communication, learning, studying, teaching, commerce, trade, arguments, all sorts of things like that, right? Now, Mercury in Taurus doesn't necessarily have any dignity from the point of view of the three main levels of dignity, which is rulership, exaltation, or triplicity. They're the three top levels when you're talking about dignity for planets. And so Mercury doesn't have any dignity in any of those levels. It does get some points in the terms and in the decans, but I don't really work with terms or decans very much at all. So I'm not really going to focus on that, but I just want to mention that in case people are interested in exploring that themselves, and or if somebody turns around and says, well, no, Mercury does have some dignity in the terms of this or in the first decan of Taurus, because Mercury rules the first decan of Taurus, for example. So I am aware of that. I just don't really give a lot of focus to it. I generally tend to pay attention to rulership, exaltation, and triplicity. So if we think about Mercury retrograde in a Venus-ruled sign, which is what it is, Venus rules Taurus. And if you think about the earth signs as being specifically connected to this, third dimension reality, earth signs. It's why they are earth signs. They completely have to do with all matters relating to the earth. And Venus, of course, being the ruler of Taurus, is very much the morning star energy of Venus. The morning star of Venus is the goddess, the archetype that speaks very strongly to earthly matters. So when we're thinking about Mercury going retrograde in Taurus, as I said, look at where it is in your birth chart and what houses does Mercury rule. So where is Gemini and Virgo in your birth chart, because Mercury rules those two signs. And think about this retrograde cycle as clearly a reflection and review process of all things to do with Taurus, really, but more broadly speaking, to do with Virgo and Capricorn as well, because that's where Mercury is going to retrograde later in the year. So it's a bit of a journey and a process about our whole mental faculty, our thoughts, our ideas, mental activity, communication, learning, studying, the specific thoughts that we have about reality, about this earth plane. And so from the point of view of Mercury being in Taurus, it's thinking about consolidation, form, structure, building, creating things, right? So let me just read a few things before I just unpack some of these other features that I've highlighted. And so, as I said, it is about 2 pages. I might jump over a few sentences. It just depends how relevant, I suppose, they are. So Earth signifies concern with the physical, with practical, common sense matters. Earth is a symbol for direct sense experience of the physical universe without ideas, concepts, beliefs, or wishful thinking to cloud perception. Now, that's an interesting statement because we're talking about Mercury here, and Mercury is about our concepts and ideas, can be about wishful thinking and, perception and things like that. So it's interesting because what he's saying here is that Earth itself, the quality, the element of Earth doesn't necessarily connect to these abstract concepts, ideas and perceptions that we have as a way of our normal Mercury function, if you like. It is both matter and symbolizes the quality of being substantial and material. It symbolizes the quality of being substantial and material. It is both matter and the need to deal with matter. Matter resists us if it pushes back on us as we push on it. We cannot walk through walls or occupy the same space as another material entity at the same time. Thus, matter, and through it, the symbol Earth signifies limits to our freedom, in which regard the element Earth is related to the planet Saturn. So when we think about I'm not reading now, I'm just speaking. When we think about the Earth Triad, we can certainly really, we can connect it so strongly to the planet Saturn, right? Because Saturn rules the Earth, the earthly experience. Other planets have to do with earthly experiences as well, sure, but the fundamental structure of reality is Saturn, right? Certainly the conscious structure. And our experience on Earth as physical beings is an earthly experience, right? We're in a physical body and we have a biological clock, which is ruled by Saturn. And so we have certain limitations. We may want to fly, we may want to imagine ourselves with wings flying around in the sky, but we physically can't do that. We can imagine it, we can dream it, we can paint it, we can sing about it, we can dance through it, but we can't physically actually do it. That's the nature of the physicality of this earth plane, which is the Earth is the element that speaks to the dense matter of this 3D plane. So there are limitations implied, basically, because of that. There are also really positive things. It's not just about all limitations because, well, you'll see as I continue to read. So then he says, we cannot do whatever we wish or go wherever we want to because we are constrained by our own materiality and the materiality of the world around us, which is what I was just explaining a moment ago. No matter how bound up in fantasies, ideals, or abstractions we are, we must always deal with Earth and its concerns. Earth is the ultimate arena in which the acts we perform become manifest. And in the way we usually deal with the world, nothing is real unless it impinges in some way on the physical universe. Earth must not, however, be thought of as limiting and structuring only in a negative way. It is also a support and a source of nurture. We often refer to the Earth Mother as the source of all life and being, which she is. She is a living, breathing entity. There is a fertile aspect to Earth, enabling entities to come into a form of being in which they can be perceived by all. Water is also a fertile element, but it is not so likely to manifest its fertility as something tangible. Unlike fire, Earth is stable, the most stable of all the elements. Also, unlike fire, Earth is passive. It needs to be acted on and formed by an external energy. For Earth people to be really productive, there must be a positive, assertive energy provided by the planetary combinations in their charts. Otherwise, the Earth type of personality remains passive. So too much Earth and no fire, for example, doesn't help us to get that push, that drive to get things done. We just kind of get stuck, as it were. And stuck is a good word for Taurus, because Taurus is really, it is the most fixed sign of all the fixed signs. It's very, very fixed, and that's why you often hear in very basic sort of personality astrology, if you like, the comment or the expression of, Taurians are just so stubborn, right? They're stubborn because they're really fixed in nature, and it takes a lot to move Taurus, right? So I suppose one thing with this Mercury in Taurus to consider as well is our own inner dialogue and ideas and perceptions and mental attitudes and things of that nature, and how we might be inflexible, and how is that serving ourselves, the situation, the pathway, the storyline, the narrative, and so forth. And the square to Pluto is going to be a big deal around that sort of thing, which I'll come to shortly. Earth tends to resist change, and it can signify structures that break down under pressure because the lack of flexibility that allows adaptation. Earth often represents stubborn conservatism, in which an excessive concern for what is real at any moment blocks the ability for any new reality to come forth. Now, I've seen this a lot with people that have Mercury in Capricorn. I haven't come across too many Mercury and Taurus people, but I've come across a lot of people with Mercury and Capricorn, and I've seen that this statement he says here is just so literal in the examples that I've seen. He says it represents stubborn conservatism, in which an excessive concern for what is real at any moment blocks the ability for any new reality to come forth. Now, use your imagination with that statement, because that can be applied to, a billion different examples. It's just a really powerful statement of how Mercury in an earth sign, not so much Virgo. Remember, Mercury has tremendous dignity in Virgo as well. It's in its rulership and exaltation, right? So it works very differently in that earth sign. But I'll talk about Mercury in Virgo when Mercury retrogrades in Virgo, which will be in August this year. So I don't want to talk about Mercury retrograde in Virgo now, because, there's no point. It hasn't happened yet. And this video would be 3 hours long if I went into the 3 retrogrades. So I'm just breaking it down to Mercury retrograde in Taurus. But these ideas, as I said at the beginning, that I'm referencing are applicable to all the earth signs, but we need to understand how they may have different nuances or different applications or different expressions through each of the 3 different earth signs, because yes, they are all earth signs, but they are all different from each other as well. They have common aspects or features, specifically the fact that they are earth, right, and correspond to earthly matters, but each of them approach the earthly matters in very different ways as well. That's important to always consider. So then he says, in this way, earth can become a barrier to the very function it is supposed to assist, namely giving form and substance to what is newly created. It should be clear that fire and earth are partners capable of acting in ways that are antagonistic, but requiring each other in order to make any impact at all. See, fire helps earth get going, basically. Earth has that practical element of creating, if you like, the process that's involved, the practical process that's involved in creating anything. But the fuel, the inspiration, the fire, the energy, the will comes from the fire signs, you see. Okay, so then he says, where fire wishes to change things, earth will usually try to make the best of the status quo. Earth signifies making do with what is available. That couldn't be further from the truth, especially when it comes to Virgo, right? Virgo is absolutely unbelievable at doing with very, very little, getting the most out of very, very little. I've seen it over and over and over again in so many Virgo people that I personally know. Quite extraordinary capability there. Okay. Fire may provide motivation, but earth provides the substance. Earth is effective for actualization, for turning dreams into reality. Sometimes the compromises that must be made with reality are more than the dreamer would wish. But at its best, Earth will make only those compromises that make a thing possible. That's just simply saying that Earth signs to create something in their life, or to get involved in a project or whatever it is, Earth signs need to sense and see the practical outcome of the situation. If it's too Pisces, dream oriented, for instance, or they might say, no, that's completely unrealistic, right? They're not going to go for it, right? So Earth is very much interested in the outcome, the practical solution, the practical outcome, the ability to realistically achieve the objective, right? So all of these things are worth considering while Mercury is in Taurus. Okay, of course, there are also Earth types who, in their efforts to actualize something, will completely destroy the ideal behind it. Sometimes a lack of vision or an excessive concern with the petty aspects of reality will obscure Earth's comprehension of the whole and cause it to act out of fear rather than concern with practical reality. Now, I can see that a lot in Mercury and Capricorn specifically, because it's a Saturn-ruled sign, and Saturn is specifically connected to fear. More than any other type, Earth people need a broadening education. With a broad perspective, they can be very effective, whereas with a narrow one, they can be very negative. Again, I've seen that a lot with Mercury in Capricorn. Being a relatively passive element, Earth perceives better than fire. Earth people are usually close to their gut reactions to life. They are at their best when they can use their own experience and perceptions, when they do not have to rely on what others have told them. Then they have an uncanny ability to go right to the heart of the matter and perceive what to do. But because of a limited ability to handle abstractions, an Earth type acting on concepts based on someone else's experience is unlikely to understand a situation at all. Earth may be very aware of the outer world that can be experienced through the senses, but it is not aware of emotional considerations, which are more abstract, less tangible, and also more personal. Inner experience is valued less highly by the Earth temperament because Earth tends to focus its perceptions externally. Virgo and Capricorn especially are inclined to sacrifice emotional needs when these come into conflict with their view of reality. And I've seen, once again, I've seen that a lot in people that I personally know that have strong Capricorn Virgo placements, for instance. Sometimes a concern for practicality actually gets in the way of practical achievement. This can happen when one neglects the emotions of those with whom one is dealing, even though the emotions are as much a part of the environment, which must be handled as are its purely material aspects. So he's just saying, that the emotional content or component connected to a situation is just as important and feeds into the creation of things, right? And he's also pointing out that earth signs would be more inclined to suppress or deny the emotional component and go straight to the practical element of the situation, whatever it is. And I've seen this over and over again in strong earthly archetypal individuals. Okay, let's see. From this source comes the efficiency expert whose concern with efficiency is so great that he creates an environment in which no one can work. If carried too far, concern for what is real in a narrow material sense may become completely irrational. So some interesting comments to consider when you're thinking about the earth element. And that, as I said, that could apply to any planet in an earth element. Obviously, it would have variations and differences depending on the nature of the planet and so forth. There's always, we always need to consider what is the planet, you know, how does it connect to this particular element or this particular sign, so on and so forth, right? So it's not black and white. There's a number of things that need to be integrated when we are assessing any planet in a sign or a elemental quality. So the North Node and Mercury form this conjunction here. And when Mercury stations direct on the 14th of May, it picks up the conjunction to the North Node again. So I would say that, you know, in the last few days and right up to now, to the 7th of April, if you've made, you know, an important alliance, an important connection with a particular individual, let's say, there's going to be possibly some kind of rethinking or reviewing around that alliance. And the matters perhaps would have to do with Taurus things, which could be money, of course, or it could have to do with love or creativity or the arts, you know, all Taurus things, all Venus, Taurus type things. And just at a very, you know, mundane, practical, everyday level, it is about consolidation, right? Resources, you know, Taurus is our own resources. How do we create our own resources? How do we sustain them? How do we continue to build them? And so Mercury North Node could be aligning with a particular individual that is supportive with something in your life that is assisting with your approach to consolidating your own resources, for instance. The square to Pluto is a really intense dynamic aspect, of course, and there's lots of things we could say about it, but two very distinct things, which one would be more the challenging component of it, let's say, and the other statement I'll make would be the more developmental or evolutionary process of it. So the more challenging energy of a Pluto square Mercury can be being obsessive about a particular idea and trying to persuade and convince those around you that your process, your mental process and your idea and your thoughts are absolutely correct and everybody else's are wrong. The person who comes to mind at the moment who's under this transit, just as a way of this transit being in the sky at the moment and having a possible effect collectively and to some of us very personally, is Donald Trump. And I'm not going to go into him and his chart and the whole, you know, shenanigans of what's going on, because frankly, I don't care. But I am still aware that, you know, he's just gone to court and there's charges against him. And I'm aware that he's given a public speech and so on and so forth. And there's I haven't watched his speech necessarily because I don't know, I'm just not into him, right? I'm not for him or against him. I'm just not into him, just neutral, don't care kind of thing. But my understanding is that he's trying to persuade. Now, whether he's being honest or not, I'm not here to debate that. I don't really care. But I'm just pointing out the astrology, right? He's under this Pluto Mercury square at the moment where he's trying to seduce and or manipulate and or convince and bring forth an adamant conviction of his position and being wrongly accused and so on and so forth. And that may very well be the case, may or it may not. I'm not here to debate or talk about that. Again, I'm just speaking to, it's just an awesome example just to demonstrate the power of this Pluto Mercury. Now, Pluto Mercury natives, for instance, they're very persuasive people with the written and spoken word, with logos. It's when somebody has a dialogue with you and they've got a Mercury Pluto aspect, they're going to be pretty damn convincing in what they're saying to you. It's a very, very powerful energy. I mean, any planet that Pluto is forming a relationship to, it empowers that planet for better or for worse, right? Pluto is empowerment, period. So imagine the power that comes through speech and ideas and logos and etc., learning, teaching, and so forth, speeches. And, think about, a lot of the things that are in the political arena that are being discussed, it's got a lot to do with Taurus things, it's got to do with the different values and value systems, the lefts and the rights and the this and that, and the, destruction of things in the USA and the lack of resources and the lack of this and the lack of that. All Taurus, resources, right? It's, Taurus is the Earth's sustenance that provides the nutrients and nourishment that we need in this physical body. And that then in turn manifests in the physicality of the physical, practical things that we create and co-create, including selling food, buying food, making food, businesses, all that sort of stuff. And of course, Mercury deals with commerce, selling and trading. And these are a lot of the themes that are being discussed, as it were, from the political chaos that's going on in the USA, right? So just an interesting example to point to a specific individual relative to Pluto square Mercury. Now, for our own self, I guess the thing to reflect on and contemplate on is, what are we sort of perhaps, where might we be fixated or stuck on a particular idea or thought process or things that we are just trying to create in that material sort of world. The square from Pluto is asking us to break down some of that fixed nature that Mercury in Taurus can have. Mercury in Taurus can be very tunnel vision, very stubborn, very fixed. Think about the comments that I was reading out of the book just a moment ago, from the point of view of Earth creating that sort of limited space, if you like, because it's so concerned with the practical result and outcome and can't open itself up to other possibilities of what may seem more abstract or more imaginary or more intuitive, which would come from signs like Sagittarius and Pisces, for instance. Mercury in Taurus doesn't have that natural ability to go there. It can be very, very stuck. And so if we can see that, and we can see that in ourselves, and that we might be just cornering our own perspectives and boxing ourselves in, there can be that. And or there can be just the ability to tune into that Mercury in Taurus in a way that helps us think about our own resources and how we might be able to consolidate and create further, but not just thinking in a narrow way with it, but rather being a little bit more open-minded and allowing Pluto to transform that part of our linear left brain, Mercury, Gemini, left brain, that linear process and thinking of ideas that we have. Pluto's presence here really can take us into greater depths in our own mind of being able to see things with greater depth, as opposed to just the surface material physical plane of things, because the physical reality is one dimension, and we have a soul, a spirit, a light body. There are other dimensions, but again, you know, through our physical eyes and our physical sensations and physical body, we only tend to feel on a physical level and perceive our world around us as it appears. But that's not where things end, so to speak. And there's so much that is contained within us. In fact, everything is within us. So Pluto squaring Mercury, at best, can be that portal of energy that helps us break down maybe some of our own rigid thinking in order to create from a deeper space and expand and create more powerful resources, because we have them within us. And Mercury in Taurus is focused on resources, survival resources, building, investments, you know, all those sorts of things. And Pluto squaring it takes us into that deeper landscape of the soul, where there's an abundance of riches. Pluto rules the riches within us. So it's up to us really how we navigate this portal that is active at the moment, has been active since the 4th of April, and will be activated again when when Mercury stations direct at 5 degrees of Taurus, which is on the 14th of May. So we can think about the comments that have made, how you relate to any of those comments relative, obviously, to your circumstances and your life story, where you are at the moment. Because the Mercury retrograde, the classic thing that we know about Mercury retrograde or any planet retrograde, is it's a review process. It's a process of going within, as it were, and reflecting, reconsidering, reviewing. The retrograde journey can also be a time where we change our mind, in this case, very specifically change our mind because it's Mercury, and also make a new decision during the retrograde cycle. And I say that because some people think that it's not wise to make decisions during a retrograde period, and that's not true. We can actually make very powerful decisions during a retrograde cycle, in this case, Mercury retrograde. So what else did I want to talk about? Of course, you know, the Pluto square Mercury can be, you know, very strong very strong debates with people, you know, people having sort of conflict and power struggles in their communications, and, you know, they're debating, just like Donald Trump is at the moment. He's debating with, you know, an opposing sort of team and force, and they're debating with him, and both parties are trying to impart their perspective as being the right one, whether it's legally or otherwise, and they're both holding a strong position of power, and both cannot win. That's what combat is. It's what competition is. There's got to be someone that's got to win, as it were. Unfortunately, that is a very personality-based expression, of these archetypes. But it's just part of this experience in this world. A lot of people are going to have that kind of experience with it. Some more than others, for instance. So that's right, the sextile to Saturn. So, well, Mercury certainly has no dignity in Pisces, so there's no reception there. Saturn doesn't necessarily have any dignity in Taurus, essential dignity, like the 3 primary levels. Let's see. Yeah. So Saturn does not have a rulership, exaltation, or triplicity in the sign of Taurus. So the sextile aspect between Mercury and Saturn is not as strong as it could be if they had some type of other reception going on, which they don't. But nevertheless, water and earth, which is one of the sextiles, water to earth, is a blending of energies that work together, right? There's a harmonious exchange, right, in a sextile aspect. And also, just from the point of view of transits, sextiles, not only does it speak to 2 elements that are flowing together, working harmoniously, and obviously when something is working in a harmonious way, there's no resistance, right? There's no tension. There's harmony. It's like if you're working with somebody and there's no resistance and you're just harmoniously working together, there's more possibility for opportunities to come out of that, right? So the sextile actually speaks to opportunities, literally, that can be presented to us. So I guess the thing about Saturn being sextile Mercury here, the one other connection that I would make is that Saturn rules the Earth and the Earth plane and our experience of reality and our conscious construct of it. And of course, Taurus is the sign and element that is mostly connected to the Earth. So from that point of view, there's a really lovely connection there, right? Saturn to Taurus. So given the sextile is sort of there twice, really, Mercury picked up the sextile early April, and then it picks it up again just before Mercury turns stationary direct later in the month of May, 14th of May. So there's 2 opportunities here that could be coming into the focus for you, right? And of course, Saturn Mercury is thinking seriously about things, it could be signing a contract. Mercury is contracts. Saturn is commitment, right? So it's something that you are considering quite seriously is being supported here with the sextile from Mercury to Saturn. So that's just something that is an easier element of one of Mercury's aspects through this retrograde cycle. It's the square to Pluto that's extremely challenging, or can be extremely challenging. But on the other hand, if we can open ourselves up to greater possibilities of our limited perceived thoughts that we can have at times, then Pluto can take us into, as I said, the landscape and depths of the soul and dive into the landscape of the richness that exists there, so that we can bring it up, right, as it were, to the surface and rethink it and then recreate it, as it were, Mercury in Taurus. So also Pluto Mercury aspects in the square, it can be a powerful portal for studying, and specifically studying things that have to do with psychology, the occult, all the esoteric and occult levels of study and teachings, and there are many, right? Anything you choose to investigate, research, or study under a Mercury-Pluto transit has tremendous potential for discovering things that are, that are just very, very deep and penetrate and break through the surface matter of a particular story, conversation, study, research, etc. It's the ability to penetrate to the depths of whatever it is you are studying. So there can be something very powerful going on in the retrograde cycle of Mercury relative to Pluto, just with your own learning and studying. You may just have a really profound level of opening inside you that enables you to dig deeper into things that you are trying to further understand. It could be about your own birth chart. It could be about things that you are reading and studying that you felt a little bit blocked or a little bit limited, or it's been hard to go deeper with a particular subject. It could just be you're reading a book on mysteries or some novel on some mystery, and it's just that penetrative part of Pluto that goes very deep into anything that you are learning, reading, or communicating with another about, right? It's as simple as that. So let's see. So as I said, Mercury stations retro on the 21st of April at 15 degrees of Taurus, just after the solar eclipse. And it has let me just show you. So Mercury builds up to a conjunction to Uranus as well. Let's see when that happens. It's around about, well, it's within orb all these days here. So, from 16th of April, let's say. And then there's Mercury stationary. See the little S there? That's stationary retrograde on the 21st of April. So Mercury slowed right down here. It's kind of like dead stopped, as it were. It's a very potent time, though. When a planet stops to change directions, it's a very powerful portal, that particular energy right there. A lot can happen in that time, believe it or not. Now, so it's stationing direct, stationing retrograde with that's a pretty important element actually that I forgot to add. So we'll talk about that now quickly. The stationary retrograde period is with Mercury picking up a conjunction to Uranus. It's not exact, it's an applying conjunction, but it's certainly within range, within orb. It's there. Now, I really love this aspect. So think about just some of the comments I'm going to make from the point of view of everything else that I mentioned about Mercury square Pluto and Mercury sextile Saturn. The Mercury conjunct Uranus is definitely sudden flashes of insight that can come to us. It can be a very mentally restless, and it can bring some anxiety up for some people as well, because Mercury just gets this electrical sort of what's the word? It gets an electrical touch, if you like, from Uranus. And both Mercury and Uranus actually have to do with the mind and the memories and the memory body, right? Mercury is short-term memory and Uranus is the long-term memory. So when you see Uranus Mercury, there can be sudden insight that comes up into your consciousness that could be just absolutely groundbreaking for things that you are learning, new information that you find out about an important matter in your life. It could be about health. It could be about, it could be anything. It's just simply that Uranus brings forth that component of wisdom and insight, freedom and liberation, and sudden, unexpected, unpredictable, exciting type of ideas, new ideas. Mercury Uranus is one of the best, if you have transiting Uranus conjunct your Mercury, for example, it's one of the best times to learn astrology, like literally one of the best times. I remember, well, when I first started, not when I first read my first book, because when I read my first book, I was 12 on the subject of astrology. But when I went to study it formally, I was in my early 20s. Uranus was transiting my ascendant at the time. So it was perfect symbolism for for a journey that I started that was going to be exactly what my soul was intending, right? The ascendant is the soul in esoteric astrology, by the way, and Uranus is the planet of astrology. So if you have transiting Uranus on your Mercury at some point, that's a wonderful time to study astrology. That's what I was going to say. When Uranus was in Aries and it went over my Mercury, I had already studied years of astrology, years and years. I was teaching it. I was doing readings. I've been very immersed and involved in it for a long period of time. But when Uranus got to my Mercury, I studied other things within the subject of astrology and just went into much deeper levels of some of the teachings that I had already been working with, and also included some new levels and new teachings and new wisdom of astrology, right? But basically it was almost a 2-year period where I just couldn't get enough. My brain was the wiring of my brain was so electrified and so alive at that time that I was literally writing and reading astrology. Like the only time I wasn't was when I was asleep. And I'm sure when I was asleep, my brain was just still wired and I was just thinking in my sleep. Like I can't tell you how much I wrote and studied at that time. It was amazing. It was extraordinary. I absolutely loved it. Now this transit here, this is only here for a few days, right? So we're not talking about the same level of experience, of course. It's just a little miniature portal, but still it could create a little, something sudden that can come through that can really provide just greater insight into things that you are learning about. Sometimes, it can just be like penny drops that you have that kind of flash. Something just makes so much sense all of a sudden. Like it's like so crystal clear to me. I can really understand that, whereas previously I was struggling with it. It can be something as simple as that. And it can include sibling things as well, because Mercury is always associated to siblings as well, right? Of course. I just want to see when Mercury gets back to Uranus again. Okay, so that's where it forms its exact conjunction, 5th of June. So that's important because Mercury stations retrograde while he's very close to Uranus, and then by the 5th of June, Mercury comes to form an exact alignment with Uranus. So there could be something that is sparked off, even if it's just a small spark at this time, or when Mercury goes retrograde on the 21st of April, that will become even more clear, or there'll just be something that will just kind of line up in an unusual, unexpected sort of fashion. It will, yeah, it's hard to articulate, because with Uranus, you can't predict. Some astrologers will say you can't predict an astrology period. There's some truth to that to some extent, but that's another conversation. And what I'm doing is not predicting, I'm forecasting. A forecast is very different to a prediction. So this is not about prediction, this is about forecast, right? So being aware of the energies that are manifesting and evolving as they transit, as the planets transit, as it were, through the zodiac, right? And with Uranus, yeah, it's always it can be so many different things that you just did not expect. And sometimes the unexpected that can come through, it can shock people, because that's what Uranus does. It shocks us, especially when we're not ready for it. But if we work from more of a Uranian sort of field of consciousness, which is less resistant, more able to go with the flow, and more able to step into the field of uncertainty, then the transits of Uranus, depending on what the situation is, of course, may not be as shocking, right? But Uranus definitely, no matter how evolved or how wise a person may be, when Uranus sets something off in your birth chart specifically by transit, it can be a very shocking experience, and it can sort of uproot your whole foundations. And it did that to me when my father transcended this world, and my career at the time, which was different, was in the conventional consensus world, you know. So I've experienced that that level of shock from Uranus, and it's on the complete opposite end of what we might call easy. So there is that element as well, but on a very simple, basic level, it can just be incredible wisdom, intuition, and ideas that are born out of this conjunction, and wonderful learning and insights from an astrological perspective, especially. Okay, I think I will leave it there for today. And I said I wasn't going to come back for about 2 weeks, but I just had a small window, and I thought it was important to talk about Mercury retrograde. So hopefully this offering sheds some light, or gives you some things to think about and consider in your own chart relative to where Mercury in Taurus going retrograde speaks to, relative to your own birth chart. As always, leave your questions and comments below, and I'll see you guys very soon. And also, I wanted to say this at the beginning, and I'm glad I just remembered now. I just wanted to say it is Easter weekend. Although for me personally, my Easter is next weekend, because I follow the tradition of the Greek Orthodox Easter. But I'm aware that many people on the planet are celebrating Easter this weekend. And to me, Easter is extremely sacred, extremely powerful, and a wonderful reminder of our own evolutionary journey, our trials and tribulations of death and rebirth, even just within one incarnation, everything that we go through and how we transform and are reborn. And also, because it's resurrection. Easter is all about the resurrection of Christ. Now, whether you believe in Christ or not, that's up to you. But even if you don't follow those traditions or those teachings, this is, and energetically and spiritually speaking, this is a really powerful portal speaking to the theme of resurrection in our own life at the moment. So it's a very powerful time, and I just wish you all a happy and powerful resurrection. Okay, thanks for listening, and bye for now.